morning and welcome everybody. Buenos días, bienvenidos. Os damos la bienvenida al Congreso. Vamos a intentar ser puntuales con el horario, así que vamos a dar comienzo a este panel 6 sobre el humor y la enseñanza de lenguas. So let's try to be punctual with the timetable in order to try to have time for the lunch. As you know, we have the photo exhibition later. Entonces me gustaría comenzar dando la bienvenida a nuestras colegas que van a presentar el panel, el paper First versus Second Language Pragmatics of Humor. Kerry Mulan, Christine Bill.
Vamos a decir.
Sí, Caroline David y Cecil Pusa. Comenzamos con esta comunicación.
Buenos días, bonjour, good morning everyone. I'm Kerry, these are my colleagues Caroline and Cecile. Christine and Laurence are not with us, but they have very much contributed to this project, so they're with us in spirit. I'm going to take you through the first half of the study, so a little bit of information, the context, the theory, and the methodology that we use. And then I will talk to you about what we call the L1 data, so the first language data, and then I'm going to pass over to my colleagues for the second half. Okay. So this study on interactional humour actually takes place within a much larger project entitled From Perception to Oral Production, or POP, as we like to call it. It's a project that's been going on at the University of Montpellier in France for some years now, and the goal is to identify the links between comprehension and production processes and the various sources of difficulty for French students of English. In this particular study today, though, what we're looking at is how the pragmatic functions of humour operate in the cross-cultural L1 French data, so the first language French, and the first language L1 English, and in the intercultural, what we call L2, L1 data between the English native speakers and the French students of English. So to clarify what we mean by humour in conversation, we like to use this definition by Holmes and Mara. It's quite an old one, but it really fits what we do. They say that conversational humour is utterances which are identified on the basis of paralinguistic, prosodic and discursive clues as intended by the speaker or speakers to be amusing and perceived to be amusing by at least some of the participants. So in other words, what qualifies as humour in conversation relies on a mixture of speaker intention and listener interpretation, and it's based on a number of clues. So we are basing our study on Béal and Mullen's 2013 four-dimensional model to analyse the production of humour. It should be, I should say here, that this model was originally designed to analyse conversational humour among friends in social visits. So we were able to use this model for this project, but the humour identified in this present data is more of a combination of laughter and humour, which is governed by the specific interactional situation rather than the type of spontaneous humour that we find in the social visits. So the first dimension then refers to the fact that a humorous utterance always implies a target, so someone or something that the humour is aimed at, and that's not necessarily the recipient in front of them. The second dimension is what we call the humour devices, so the actual linguistic or discursive devices or the mechanisms that speakers use to produce humour, so something like wordplay, pun, irony, etc. The third dimension is, of course, as we all well know, pragmatics. So humour fulfills a number of pragmatic and interpersonal functions, and these are often linked to what we call face management issues, and we'll see those shortly. The fourth dimension is the interactional dimension, and this focuses on the co-construction of humour. So is the humour initiated in the first turn, or is it a response to a previous turn, etc.? And although all the dimensions are present in any instance of interactional humour, we will only be looking at dimension 3 in this presentation, which is the pragmatics. But we should mention that of all the other dimensions, the target of the humour is always very closely connected to the pragmatic function. So keep that in mind as we go through our examples, and we will come back to that in the conclusion as well. So our data here then consist of 3 comparable corpora of filmed semi-structured interviews between first and second language students. So French speakers speaking together, French L1, English speakers speaking together, English L1, and English L1, so English native speakers with the L2 students of English. And you'll see here the number of dyads that we had in each of those categories. The interviews revolve around the same extract of an American romantic comedy. I don't know if anyone's seen it. It was called Because I Said So. It's an oldish film in 2007. The French translated it as In Search of the Perfect Man. So you already start to get a feel for what type of film this is. If I could say, describe it as a fairly B-grade romantic comedy. And in this, the French students watched it in French for the L1 interviews, and they watched it in English for the other interviews. The participants were asked by the interviewer to describe the scene that they had just watched, and then they had to interpret and assess the relationships between the characters. What I should say as well is that the film contains, or the scene contains, a very annoying mother. And I don't know if you can really see that there, but there's a prospective boyfriend who arrives at this girl's house, and he is carrying what can only be described as a very unusual gift, which is fairly unidentifiable. So that also became a big part of what the students were trying to talk about. The students were all about 20 to 25 years old. They were all tertiary educated, mostly undergraduates. We didn't test for their socioeconomic background, and sometimes they were acquainted with each other. We used the Eco-French Interactional Corpus norms for transcription, and that explicitly transcribes laughter. And to analyse the transcripts, we use elements of Kebrat-Orechioni's interactional discourse analysis, and also conversation analysis by Sachs, Shegloff and Jefferson, which many of you will know. So if we look then at the what we found for the native speakers, in both corpora of native speakers, as well as for the second language speakers, as it happens, humour was used to create a strong connection between the interviewer and the interviewee, and that was around topics such as judging the mother's behaviour, the type of film, and elements of personal experience around dating. Managing face concerns was the other main pragmatic function. We can see that the French data shows a few more instances of humour used this way than the English data, so 60% versus 46%. But we should say that we're only talking about 11 English and 13 French examples here, so in real terms the findings are very similar across the two corpora. We'll first look at an example in English that shows the elements of both pragmatic functions, so the creating the connection and the face management. So here you have the interviewer then who asks the interviewee, so do you like this kind of film? Yeah. It's the kind of film you'd go and watch? Yeah, unfortunately, yeah. Unfortunately, yeah, I really like, I'm just questioning my choices now. I'm being interviewed on film about the type of films I watch. And does this short extract make you want to go and watch the rest of the film? Oh, I've already seen it. Okay. I was watching it thinking, I could watch this again. You know, it's one of those films I would watch, like when you have a hangover, I just lie in bed and you put it on, okay, and you don't want to think about it, okay. So yeah, I was kind of watching it thinking, maybe I could watch it again, but I probably shouldn't. So what you have in this example then is the interviewee who's mocking her own taste in films. She sets up an amusing image of herself being hungover and lying in bed and only capable of watching this type of film which doesn't require much thinking. She admits while she's watching the extract that she was saying to herself she could watch the whole film again, but then realises that's probably not a good idea. So the first occurrence of laughter then acts as a face-saving device while she's delivering a negative judgment on the extract of the film. So she says, oh, yes, unfortunately I do like this kind of film, but I acknowledge how bad it is. The following occurrences of laughter shows how the interviewee is then trying to build a connection with the interviewer, who responds with repetition and 2 instances of laughter. And it acts as a face-saving device while she shares her personal and pretty embarrassing information about her taste in films, which is quite bad. In the French examples, what we have are two different examples. In the first one, I'll just go through the English translation. So the interviewee, so the participant says, oh, you know, it's the kind of film, I think a rom-com, romantic comedy, like you see all the time, a la, or in a way of My Big Fat Stupid Wedding, that kind of film, something like that, a kind of comedy of errors. No, I don't think I'd want to waste 2 hours on it. So what the interviewee does here is make a pejorative statement about the film, which is intended to make the interviewer laugh, and she makes a reference to a certain type of this kind of silly, unrealistic romantic comedy. She is implicitly looking to build a connection with the interviewer by evoking shared knowledge about this kind of stupid film. In the second example, you have the interviewer who says, okay, so does this make you want to see the rest of the film by any chance? Yeah. Oh, okay, and why? Well, just to know whether it's going to work out or not afterwards. So here she's using humour to save her face. She minimises her potential shame at wanting to watch the rest of the film by just claiming curiosity as her motivation. So at this point, I'll pass over to my colleagues to talk about the second language data and to present the conclusions.
Thank you, Carrie. Okay.
Now we're going to see what the general tendency in L2 are. In L2 data, humour is mainly used to create a connection between the interviewee and the interviewer on topics such as the invasive mother and the type of film, a rom-com, but also on the interviewee's comprehensions problems. Indeed, the interviewees expect sympathy from the interviewer regarding their difficulty to understand some parts of the film extract. Here's an example of connection triggered by an L2 speaker, Pop 31, int being the interviewer. This example is quite typical of what we found in our corpus. The character of the invasive mother in the film is often the way for the L2 speakers to create a bond with their interviewer. If I were Millie, I would have put my mother kick her ass, you can see. What did I do? Is that the right one?
Yeah.
Yes. If we now look at face concerns in the L2 data, humour is mostly used in self-defense to a perceived face threat. It is also used to threaten the interviewer's face, as expected in English, and very seldom to repair a real or potential threat. We will see an example of self-defense, then an example of face threat in the next 2 slides. As you can see here, Pop 45 mentioned that she can't figure out what the object is. Okay, so an object that you can smell, etc. So humour as self-defense occurs when L2 speakers evidence language problems. For example, when they haven't understood a passage of the film extract or the interviewer's question, or when they don't find the words in English. It also occurs when they acknowledge that they like the film, although they consider it stupid.
anything happens.
No, let's have a look. No,
No, that's
that's the right one.
that's
Now let's have a look at a case of faith threat. It says, no, laughing, okay, no, I'm fine with that, all right, super fine. By answering abruptly, Pot 56 destabilizes the interviewer and somehow could put an end to the interviewee prematurely. Although the cases of faith threat represent 31% of faith concerns, only some of the L2 speakers actually perform a faith threat. 12 speakers out of 34, 5 of them being particularly vigorous, as shown here.
So now we come to the conclusion. So as a conclusion, we'll focus on 3 elements. What is common to L1 and L2 speakers of English, what is specific to L2 speakers of English, and finally, what is specific to L1 speakers and is not shared by L2 speakers. So, what is common to L1 and L2 speakers of English is the fact that humor is used to create a bond with the interviewer, half of the instances for the L2 speakers, and the fact that humor is recipient-oriented in terms of target, even if it remains infrequent. What is specific to L2 speakers of English is when they use humor in a rather aggressive manner, as a self-defense reaction to their own language or comprehension difficulties. In terms of target, again, when they favor third-party oriented humor, as evidenced in previous research on L1 speakers of French. And thirdly, in cases of self-oriented humor, when L2 speakers use humor in a typically French way, making comments on their own speech in order to mock language problems. Now, what is specific to L1 speakers and is not or rarely shared by L2 speakers is the fact that L1 speakers seem to know that they're not the ones being tested. As a result, they co-construct a more collaborative and egalitarian interaction than in a standard interview format. This, in turn, has an impact on their behavior in relation to verbal humor. Humor used in self-defense and as a face threat is almost absent. Recipient-oriented humor is used not to tease, but to create rapport and to distance themselves from the experimental situation. And the interactional dynamic shows a merging of the roles of interviewer and interviewee, with humor being frequently initiated by either one or the other. Thank you very much.
Gracias a todos. Tenemos un tiempo breve, pero para hacer unas preguntas, empezamos un poco tarde, por lo cual vamos a retrasar un poco, pero para algunas preguntas tenemos tiempo.
Thank you for your talk. I was just wondering.
Oh, we thought, yes, you dropped it.
I was just wondering about the part when you showed this example where the L2 speaker used humor to so like in the situation where she had to say that she didn't understand part, something in the language.
Yeah, that's probably... No, that's not the one. I didn't understand. Okay, so an object that you can smell.
For me, just so that reading the transcript, I don't really see the humor. I only see that you noted that there was not from the description here, I would think maybe it's just like embarrassment laughter and not so much humor. So I was just wondering whether you try to tease those two aspects apart.
Yes, the relationship between humour and laughter is not always obvious, as you point out. What we try to do here is look at where we thought there was humour and laughter going together. We left out a lot of instances of laughter, which we just thought was just nervous. We did feel there was some humour here, where she says, yes, I think because it comes a bit later, but this, to be fair, this is an example which is a really fine line of that there's more laughter than humour, maybe, but we did feel there was some humour there. There's an object you can smell.
Actually, the object is the anti-static
Yes.
spray or something, because in a previous situation she was
Where
like...
that the students hadn't seen.
So they had to imagine why he didn't bring any roses or any flowers.
Whatever.
And it's because it refers to a previous scene.
Where she had
Some
a big balloon sticking to
on
her
bottom,
back.
yeah.
And that's when they first met, actually. So that was a reference to their first meeting.
Yeah, maybe that's not a clear-cut one.
No, but that shows the difficulty to really, as you said, I think that the last part, here there's, in the last, at the end of the extract here, you have an example of shared laughter. Yeah, maybe. And that.
Yeah.
Thank you for your talk. I really liked it. And I was just wondering whether you interviewed the participants yourselves.
No.
You were the teachers.
No.
Because I feel that.
There were pairs, like students, like
There-
feeling no...
They were the same age. We chose French-speaking and English native speakers, and they were the same age. We took that into account, and they were students themselves. So that there was that time of proximity that is, for instance, mentioned in Bourdieu's works, that type of thing.
I think that's why we see more of an attempt to create a relationship between them as well, because they're more similar age. Yeah.
No sé si alguien tiene alguna pregunta más brevísima, por favor.
Nope.
No?
Okay.
So,
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Comenzamos pues con la segunda comunicación de la mañana a cargo de la profesora María Isabel González Cruz, titulada Using Humor for Teaching Pragmatics to FL University Students. Comenzamos pues con la segunda comunicación. Gracias.
Okay, hello, good morning everyone, thanks for coming. I'm totally delighted to be here in Alicante participating in this wonderful conference, and my presentation here is to be taken as a little contribution to share with you my own experience when incorporating humor to my teaching of pragmatics, and a compulsory subject that is taught in the last academic year, in the 4th course, to students, Spanish students of English as a foreign language who are doing a degree in modern languages, either English and French, or English and Chinese. Okay. So I've been teaching this subject for many years, almost 2 decades now, and I have to admit that it took me a while. It took me a while to convince myself that using humor as a resource in my pragmatics class will be beneficial not only for my students' motivation and learning process, but also for the class dynamics, and even for myself as a teacher, because of the, and I quote, the satisfaction that is usually, the satisfaction usually derives from arousing a positive response from students through the use of humor. So I have to say that after all these years, I have evolved as a teacher from having the traditional perception of humor as a source of distractions that reduced class efficiency, and I'm also paraphrasing a quote, to recognizing, as I do nowadays, the effective place that humor has in the classroom and also in testing. Okay? So actually my claim here will be to strongly recommend the usage of humor at all academic levels, but in particular when teaching pragmatics. I think that humor should be a must when teaching pragmatics, and I only regret not having resorted to it long before. So I think that my experience after teaching this subject of pragmática de la lengua inglesa, pragmatics, for many years, illustrates very well what has been going on in the field of education with humor, and possibly to some extent it continues to be the case. I'm referring to the notorious absence of humor from university curricula, something that has been already denounced by many scholars, not only De Los Heros, Prieto Arranz, many others. And the paradox is that even though humor is generally appreciated as a very useful tool for teaching in any field, the reality is that it is not so frequently used in the classroom as a strategy. In contrast, it is well known how humor is very effectively used in literature, in medicine, even in psychology or leadership. And many studies have proved the important role, the social functions that it plays, okay? And it's a bit slow. The key role that humor plays in important evolutionary processes and affective and cognitive functioning. In the case of education, it has been proved that humor can help in maintaining students' attention, in creating a positive relationship between teachers and students, in reducing stress and tension in the classroom, facilitating learning, and supporting a good retention and developing creativity. In particular, in the case of learning and teaching a foreign language, research has revealed that a focus on the pragmatics of humor can enrich what we already know about second language acquisition, and actually it can play a role in second language pragmatic development and use. It is a resource that can be used, humor, in second language interaction, and obviously it is recognized that it is an aspect of the second language that has to be learned. In fact, it is recognized as well as part of a speaker's communicative competence, and Attardo says that it is a pragmatic strategy that needs to be taught and learned. However, the problem is that teachers very often admit that lack of knowledge on how to do it prevents them from teaching this skill. And I think this is my case too. For many years, I was frightened. I didn't know how to do it. I was concerned that maybe this would be a disaster for the classroom. This tends to happen because by its very nature, humor may seem antithetical to the seriousness and sometimes solemnity which usually characterizes teaching and research. But anyway, all of a sudden, one day I decided that maybe it would be a good idea, and I started incorporating little by little, in a very shy way first, but over the years, I mean, the role of humor in my classes gained, more and more terrain, and nowadays I can say that I even include jokes in the final exam, and obviously in the classroom not every day, but very often, to illustrate all the theoretical concepts that we are learning. Here you can see, I'm not sure if you can see, the syllabus that I use in pragmatics. My students, when they start dealing with these subjects, normally they don't know anything about it, they have no idea what pragmatics is about, and their first glimpse of all the technicalities that are included in the syllabus, they see these weird terms like reference, inference, deixis, indirect or non-literal language, entailment, presupposition, implicature. So they say, well, what's all this? But very soon they realize that all these terms have to do with phenomena that they are more than aware of, not only because they are active speakers of their own language, but also because they are being instructed as students of English to develop their language awareness and their communicative competence in English. So very soon they realize that pragmatics is everywhere in their daily lives. So what they learn in particular is that pragmatics has to do with the study of meaning in context and about the key role that the context has when interpreting a message, and how this is possible because speakers and hearers share a system of inferential strategies that help them go from a particular utterance to the recognition of the speaker's communicative intention. So the connection between humor and pragmatics is obvious, it's only natural, since we realize that the humorous competence has been defined as a speaker's capacity to process semantically a given text and to locate a set of relationships among its components such that he or she will identify the text, or this part of it, as humorous in an ideal situation, as Attardo has put it. Oh, sorry, I did something wrong. So the fact that pragmatic phenomena are behind, they are the basis of many jokes, obviously proves as well that this connection is a fact. Humor, in fact, highlights one central aspect of pragmatics, and it is that the context and the intentions are particularly important when understanding utterances beyond their literal meaning alone. And this happens because pragmatics has to do with the mismatch between what is said and what is communicated, because very often we say more, we communicate more than we actually say. So over the years, I have managed to collect a number of jokes. Well, I don't know if I'm a bit late. Well, as Bell and Pomeranz say, humor is totally compatible with pragmatics in that it foregrounds not only the distributed nature of interpretive knowledge, but also the active role of individuals as meaning makers. So, apart from the textbook that I have published with readings and exercises to practice all the phenomena, I have resorted to video clips of very popular sitcoms, and when we analyze some of their scenes, we observe how they are based on many of these pragmatic phenomena. Perhaps watching these video clips, it takes more time because you have to explain the context, and usually there's more than one phenomena involved. So to start with, I prefer to resort to a collection of jokes that I have been able to collect over the years, and they just go to the point of the phenomena that I want to illustrate, starting with deixis and reference, and now I have a few jokes for you to see. For instance, in this one, we see how the joke is based on the wrong assignment of the deictic word he and him to the wrong subject. Okay, so it's my husband is the husband, not the dog that I'm looking that I'm trying to find a home. Or in this dialogue between a husband and a wife, where, again, by interpreting wrongly the deictic you, okay, the joke immediately arises. And also this silly joke about back to school, the problem is the wrong reference, okay? Two silly ones are in principle interpreted to be small children, but then later the joke is based on the fact that they actually refer to teachers. More jokes related to reference and to deixis is this one where the baby's father is not the same person as the husband, so that's the basis of the joke. So how important reference, to be able to assign the correct reference and the correct deictic elements, it is for humor. Other phenomena that are very easily illustrated are indirect language and literal interpretation and the communicative intention of speakers, as in this joke where the tourist uses indirect language and the passerby interprets it directly, literally. So the joke arises because actually what the passerby has done is to answer in a very correct, literal way the question that the tourist had made without recognizing his real intention. More jokes based on non-literal language are the ones here in which the word angel is to be interpreted in its two meanings. Literal meaning, we know what an angel means, but in a non-literal way, in a metaphorical way, the joke is based that in the fact that angel is also used to refer to people who have certain features like being very good nature, very kind. And the same happens with the other joke in which the customer interprets the meaning of the verb find, again, in a literal way, when you are searching for something, and not in the sense that it is also used normally, especially in restaurants, to refer to whether the client likes or dislikes the product. And there are many other jokes which are based on non-literal language. These are also 3 more examples. I think I don't have 5 minutes. Okay. So they are based on double meaning and non-literal interpretations. When it comes to other concepts that may be a little bit more complex, there are also jokes that can be very helpful to illustrate these pragmatic phenomena. For example, implicatures, these additional unstated meanings, how we say something but we mean something that is totally different, but somehow we all manage to understand, to interpret what is meant. So in this joke, for instance, 2 friends are talking, and their reaction to Kate, to this ideal man that her friend is describing, is simply answering that what she will do is a documentary, obviously implying that, well, this would be something totally extraordinary because such a man I don't think can exist, or if it exists, it's something that deserves a documentary. One of my favorite jokes, and it's difficult for students, I remember using it in one of the exams, is this little exchange between a mother and her daughter, in which there is, on the one hand, there is a presupposition, okay, which is defined as something that is assumed to be the case, to be true, in a sentence that apparently is giving information. But I always insist on the difference between implicature and presupposition being that presuppositions are in the sentence, and they simply have to look in the sentence to find them because they are linked to specific words or to grammatical structures. In this case, it's the WH word when that triggers the presupposition that the daughter actually believes that she is the best daughter in the world, although she's not directly saying that. But of course, the mother interprets that and replies in a sort of mocking way, indicating or implying that she is, although she doesn't say it, that she is actually the best daughter in the world, by suggesting that it is the girl's grandmother that should be asked that question. It's a bit difficult, but okay. And this funny joke is also nice. Here we have a lady driver who is warned by the officer, and the driver doesn't seem to interpret the intention that the officer has correctly, because she seems to understand that this is a sort of advice, okay? But obviously the officer's intention is a directive, it's an order. And the funny thing is how she implies that she has this idea about MPs that they are all thieves. So, although, of course, this is not said in the joke, but everybody has the ability to understand that. It's another case of an implicature. Many jokes in restaurants, they are all very useful. This one also deals with speech acts and the problem in recognizing the speaker's intention, as when the customer is obviously complaining, okay, but the girl, the waitress, seems to take this complaint as an expression of concern about her safety or her health. And that's it. So to conclude, with this sample of jokes, I think I have proved how humor can be successfully used in the classroom to, in my case, to specifically illustrate phenomena, pragmatic phenomena that we are studying. And so, in my experience, I have checked that this is the case, that humor is very, very useful, it's beneficial for students' motivation and the learning process, but also for the class dynamics. They also say that when you learn something with humor, you tend to remember it much more neatly. So I think that with these jokes, I'm helping my students to understand in a clear way what each of these pragmatic phenomena are. And obviously for me it's also satisfying. I'm very happy, even happier now than I was in the past with my teaching, because of this quotation by Paula Anderson that says that there is a certain satisfaction that is derived from this arousing of a positive response from students through humor. And in short, what they are doing is learning, but also enjoying so much more their learning because of the naturally and emotionally advantage that humor has. Okay, something like that. So it was not the socially and emotionally rewarding nature of humor. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias. Tenemos tiempo para algunas preguntas. So we have time for questions. Please, yeah, we have two questions, by the way. You have one. Okay. Whoever you want. We have two. Okay.
I'm okay with all the mic. Well, thank you so much for your talk. I just have a comment and a question. I don't actually the long and more. I'm also a teacher of pragmatics.
Oh, really?
And I do practically the same things you do, the same sitcoms, everything my students love it. And my question is, how do you convince the other teachers to do the same? Because some of them criticize you.
Well, I'm fortunate enough because I'm the only teacher that is doing pragmatics. But a few years ago, I shared the subject with another teacher, and in fact, I have to say that he was the one who persuaded me about using humor. So I think that thanks to him, I managed to start really using humor. Because in the past, I was like a bit reluctant, Yeah, I knew it was fine, but I was like afraid. And then definitely, yeah, sure. And maybe we can share material, jokes. Will be nice.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have time for another question.
Okay, so thank you for your presentation. Very, very interesting. You did mention in passing, but you did not elaborate on that you use humor in testing.
Yes.
And the reason I'm asking this is because I used to do that, but I stopped because my students completely lost any sense of humor. So have you been successful with humor in testing? What kind of humor do you use in the
Well,
Can you elaborate?
yeah, I mean, I just include a few jokes. I give them a selection, maybe 3, 4, 5 jokes at the most. It's just one of the questions in the final exam, of course. And they have the option of deciding which jokes they want to explain. I mean, they have to explain the pragmatic phenomena that they can see in the joke, and that they are actually what the joke is based on. So, but it's just one question, okay, one question. There are more theoretical questions and more practical questions in the traditional fashion, but and for the moment I'm happy, and I think that they are happy too, because, I mean, it's not that the whole exam is about humor. I mean, it's just one practical question. And usually, I'm very good. I always use jokes that have already been commented in class. Maybe one not, but I make sure that it's easy enough for them to cope with it. So I'm sorry to hear that your students...
I also wanted to ask you, because I also taught once social linguistics, and I was using humor. But in your case, I mean, I know you just said that you were the only teacher, but would you consider, if you have like 2 different groups, to teach one group with using humor and the other one not, in order to see the final results, to see really humor echoes and actually makes that difference? Have you?
Well, I haven't done it.
A sad experiment for those.
Yeah,
humor,
obviously.
Right?
Obviously, I always try, because I know, students complain because they want to be taught exactly the same, especially when they have different teachers. They are very, they compare. And, well, this could be done as a sort of piece of research, an experiment to check maybe on a particular concept, to see if those who have studied jokes dealing with that.
The hypothesis will be self-answered.
Well, it would be an idea, but I think it's risky, a bit risky.
Okay, sorry for interrupting you, but we should finish now because we have to.
Okay, thank you very much.
Continuamos con la sesión de las comunicaciones de la mañana, con la última presentación antes de la inauguración de la antología del humor. Recordad que es después. En este caso nos acompaña una colega de la universidad, Pilar Escabias, con la comunicación llamada The Role of Humor and Interpersonal Features in Multimodal Lessons. Aparece una señora mayor, Teaching English and Spanish at the University of Alicante.
Thank you, Maria. Okay, well, as I'm a teacher, I like to stand up and break the fourth wall from theatre research that I'm carrying out about my doctoral thesis, which, I don't know, this is the big joke when somebody asks me, when are you going to finish? And I laugh. I don't know. Hopefully soon, hopefully soon. And basically, I'm going to talk to you today about a part that I'm researching for my thesis. So it's still work, undergoing. So I hope any feedback or any lights that you shed will help me. So basically, well, the introduction, I'm going to tell you a little bit what am I doing, I mean, which kind of umbrella falls under, which is EMI. I'm not sure if you are familiar with the acronym. It's English as a medium of instruction. Nowadays, many European universities are using English as a lingua franca, the old koine, the Latin language, to communicate with other students. And we are here at the department at the university, we have created a teaching program to help teachers to teach teachers that teach content courses in English in different faculties. Okay? So part of my research is I managed to get a few of them who allowed me to get into their classes and record them. But the condition, the sine qua non condition, was that the same teacher, the same lecturer, had to teach a content course in English, but also in Spanish. Because of course I was trying to compare, in this case, the interpersonal pictures, the way they communicated with the students, the way they were trying to engage and motivate the students, and I want to compare whether it was the same or it changes when you teach in your native language, L1, or when you teach in the English as a medium of instruction language. Okay, so basically I'm going to tell you a little bit of my findings, and things still need to be a bit undercooked yet, but hopefully I can give you some ideas. Well, some of the theories I use is the multimodal analysis, and of course, not only at the University of Alicante, in Castellón, also we have Irma Fortanet, Anquerol, Noelia Ruiz. I mean, many people are doing a lot of research here in our university, Teresa Morel, but we actually get a lot of information from Humbert Tess and Theo van Leeuwen. And what I like about them is what they say, we represent and communicate meaning through a multiplicity of modes. And of course, this Congress is about verbal, but of course, we are going to see written text, we are going to see images, and we are going to see body language. So all of that communicates. And very important as well, what are teachers saying, in inverted commas, about themselves and their courses, and this is what we have just heard. I mean, we say more sometimes when we try to use humor, when we try to engage with our students, that is saying beyond just content. And also, of course, how verbal and non-verbal affect, in this case, influence positively, because affect has probably negative connotations, students' learning. Yes? And finally, a quote by Professor Jean-Marc de Wael, emotion is at the basis of any learning. So emotion and positive emotion, they are the perfect combination. And to me, humor is there. Anything that implies implication, emotion, motivation, engagement, humor is there, for sure, in one way or another. So, well, EMI at the University of Alicante, as I told you, if you notice right now, English, we are increasing the number of subjects taught in English, and we carried out a survey precisely in the community at the University of Alicante in 2014, led by Professor Teresa Morel and a group of lecturers who are part of the group of research ACQUA, which is languages acquisition at the University of Alicante. We sent it to 2,000 and something teachers and 27,000 students, because we wanted to find out what was the status quo, how they felt about being taught in English or teaching in English. We got about 900 teachers that replied to us, and about nearly 2,000 and something students who replied. They all agreed, well, those of them replied, they all agreed that English is very important, it would foster communication, internationalization, etc. So we created a teaching program. Now, my question is, in this teaching program that is actually taking place right now, yesterday I taught a session in which I'm teaching linguistic skills to future teachers of content courses in English. Do we teach humor? How to teach humor? No, but for example, when we teach them about the non-verbal modes, I ask them, what do you do to engage those students? And more, and I'm really happy because you just paved my way, more and more teachers are actually saying that they try to use a piece of an app, a song, even at university. Some images, some graphs with funny things to engage with the students. So within this program, okay, I try to incorporate, not to teach how to teach humor, because this is something either you have or you don't have, but I try to incorporate that. So in my research, of course, what I do is I take into account all the modes that we orchestrate in a class. And I can advance you, my conclusions are that teachers with a high orchestration of notes, they get better results. Because, as you said, you just teach and you forget, but if you involve and you make people understand that you are there because you care for them at the education, that echoes, and they are going to remember that. Well, in our university, we have a colleague, Natalia Norte, who precisely is publishing now and has studied the impact precisely on multimodal enseignement. So what have I done? I've taken into account the different lecture framework, and I'm actually focusing specifically in the interpersonal talk. And the interpersonal talk is what teachers do when we start a class, like how you say good morning, yesterday we saw this and that, we are going to see the following. But also, that interpersonal talk and the use of humor, it's part of the administrative talk, sometimes reminding them when it's an exam, or if there is a conference that they should go to instead of going to class, because it's very enriching and different, or even within the pedagogical. So what I'm going to show you, and of course, well, I wanted to use humor in the conference, no, and I actually used a comic for each of them, no, like administrative talk, the teacher says, no, and that is the rule for the rest of the talk, no? Or with interpersonal talk, the teacher is explaining a logic, no, a problem with logics, and he says, if A and B, B and then C, and the student says, well, I love you, professor, I love your daughter, and therefore, exactly. And then a pedagogical talk, I like that, no, because it says something like a good teacher is like a candle. It consumes itself, not to light out those things. So what have I done? What have I done? Basically, I analyzed several teachers, as I say, and what I'm going to show you today is the one, and I have covered it with a mask using the Congress logo as a hero, as an anonymous superhero, because actually my question is, will lecturers' interpersonal multimodal features in university content contents be the same, or will they change? My hypothesis is that, of course, they change, not only for obvious reasons of the language, yes, but however, I use this as part of a survey question to the teacher, and the teacher said, no, they are the same. I don't basically change the PowerPoint, I don't change the images, I don't change the language. I'm going to show you my report. So first of all, I told you, no, I didn't want to remember because he's still teaching here. One of the interpersonal multimodal that I've called number one is greeting and presenting the topic. And when he's teaching in English, when he's teaching in English, he says, hello, we are going to begin the end of lesson 1. And he's actually moving through the line. He's moving up and down. And he says, after that, we'll begin lesson 2. And he seems very confident in English. I'd say more than in Spanish when he says, buenos días a todos, ya estamos listos para comenzar la clase, hoy acabamos el tema 1. Of course, here there is no human, but it's interpersonal. Later I'll show you where in my interpersonal features I have found humor. The second one, again, when naming students, very interestingly, that in the English class, he remembers the students' names. And he says, Daniel, Pablo, do you want to tell me what you think? And with his body language, he points at them because he knows who is Daniel and who is Pablo. However, in the Spanish class, ¿cómo te llamabas? And look, okay, this is, to me, this is affective because when we use the simple, the letter in Spanish, it means that once I knew your name, but I've forgotten. It's not ¿cómo te llamas? sino ¿cómo te llamabas? Like saying, I don't remember, okay? But yeah, so still, I feel that this professor feels so far more confident in English. And later, when engaging and inviting for participation, and if you notice this lecture both in the English and the Spanish, we can see that the slides are exactly the same. The only thing that he has changed is the language translated. And basically, who can read the text? And un lector para este primer fragmento de Foucault, basically, these two, there are no differences. However, later, now when using humor, this is a class on criticism, and it's very interesting because he's using an analogy. So this is non-verbal, well, it's verbal material, but non-verbal in the sense that it's an ideogram. And in the Spanish, he's actually making a comparison with the kanji, with the shape of it, and he says, mi escobita, qué cosa tan mona. En lugar de cuchi cuchi le dices escobita mía. Because he's actually explaining how the concept of house coincides also with the concept of wife, of So he's making a joke using the verbal, non-verbal language and the transcription of this. And in English, well, and later, that's another example, later he's using, for example, painting by themes in order to attract the students' participation. So again, to me, even though this is not humorous is what he says later, he's using this image to tell the students, I'm here for you. Instead of a joke, I'm going to use a piece of art to explain a concept. So he's using this painting and he says, he describes, eso es, ella está de rodillas, rendida. Ese momento en el que te dan el beso y tú, and then he pretends he's falling, te caes y el cuerpo se te afloja. So he's using body language, expressions. What does he say in English? Well, he keeps in Spanish, y él está aún ahí. And then he's aware that I'm there recording, because I was there recording. He says, ¿cómo no me meto en un lío con una cámara delante? Él está en posición firme. Okay, there's a bit of a sexual undertone there with the joke, but the class was laughing, the people were relaxed with this, and obviously he's clasping his hands at the same time that he's saying this. And in English, however, with this same painting, or the same work of art, he says, do you play doctors when, maybe on a Thursday night? And the students laugh. But you don't normally play doctors because society has told you don't play doctors. So if you notice, even though he's making references to the same painting, he's not using the same cross-cultural references. He's changing, he's trying to adapt a little bit his use of humor, although the slides, the verbal and the written materials are exactly the same. And, well, with inter-cross-cultural references, and again using humor, he's still describing, you know, the kanji. And in English it's very interesting because he says, you can see this is like a broom and a woman. So it's the concept, the kanji of house is like a broom, and he's actually making the gesture of sweeping the floor, yes, and a woman. And then it means suma, my wife. You cannot use suma to call my wife, only me. Only I can call my wife suma, but not you, because it's not your wife. So he's explaining that. And in Spanish, however, he says, suma es una palabra que a su vez está compuesta por dos radicales, por dos elementos, que es escoba, que es un palo, imaginaos los pelitos. But then he doesn't do that sweeping movement. So he's trying to use humor to engage the students, but at the same time he's changing a little bit the body posture and the references for the class to understand what he's trying to, the meaning he's trying to convey. And what I did, I mean, this is only one aspect of one class that coincide both of them in English and Spanish. And as I said, I have analyzed other teachers, but I'm not using as much humor as these teachers. I asked the students what were their opinions at the end of the course of this teacher. I didn't want the students to know. The students knew I was there recording. The teacher knew I was there recording him, but I didn't know anyone to know why I was there. And neither the teacher. In no moment at all I told the teacher that I was going to analyze his interpersonal features, the way he was engaging with the students, the way he was using or not humor to engage with the students. And one of the questions I asked, sorry, that's the service. One of the questions I asked to the students is, según tu percepción, because the Spanish class, it had 20 students, and the English class, the same class, but in English it had 32. So I asked the 20 Spanish students, según tu percepción, ¿cómo es el lenguaje verbal del docente? And look at it, 18 out of 20, claro, preciso, ameno. So for them, ameno, fun, interesting, and of course, da ejemplos, parafrasea, modula la voz, that's another important thing, intonation. In the English students, again, out of 32, the majority here, because the bar that actually is, he or she uses pauses and silences to let students think or participate. So that is actually the one that echoes more than in comparison to the other one. With regards to the analysis and reflection on the own teacher input, I asked him, how is your verbal language, how do you define it? And he says, doy ejemplos, parafraseo, repito, confirmo, modulo la voz, utilizo las pausas. And then when I asked him, is it the same in your L1 or L2? And in this case he says, no, soy más claro en mi lengua materna. And actually it's very interesting to me, it's clearer in English. And even according to my recordings and the research I've done, and even not only that, he gives better examples, he remembers the students' names, and he gives more confidence. However, his own perception is the other way around. He gives more confidence in his own native language. With regards to the non-verbal, Spanish students, the majority remembers, no? Because this is the very last day of class, their perception is that the teacher is standing up and he moves, and I think that is part of affection and he uses humor, and of course se mueve, se aproxima al alumnado, su cara es expresiva, sonrisa, mira los ojos. So they value this. When I ask the same to the English students, basically the same results, right? So his expression, his face, his smile. And when I ask him, in this case, he thinks, no? His self-belief about himself, he thinks that yes, it is the same, no? And in fact, he analyzes this, mi cara es expresiva, sonrisas, miro a los ojos, asiento, intento sonreír a los alumnos, soy muy expresivo. But he says something that we have mentioned before, no? He says, algunas veces algunos profesionales han intentado corregirme cuando han creído que mis movimientos pueden despistar al alumnado o incluso cuando usa demasiadas bromas. Why? I think he's very effective here. And then, with the non-verbal teaching resources, it's very interesting because the Spanish students, the thing that they remember the most is el uso de la pizarra. In none of my recordings, he has used the blackboard. And it's very interesting. So my theory here is like, well, are students thinking of this teacher or other teachers? So are we still trapped in the idea of using the blackboard? Yes? However, in the English class, PowerPoint with text and images. So it's very interesting because in the English class, he's using exactly the same PowerPoint as in the Spanish class. However, for the students' perception, for the Spanish students, it's more the blackboard. For the English students, it's more the PowerPoint and the images. So that is something that I need to do about it, no? When I sit down and write my thesis. And then he says that he agrees that his materials are exactly the same, but in the other language. However, as I said, he's not that aware that he's even more clarifying in English when he explains and when he uses jokes. So the conclusions. And then I wanted to use that joke, no? So the teacher says to the student, I told you to summarize. Make it look like summarize. Yes, it's a bad joke. So my conclusions, well, the main differences observed between lecturing in L1 and L2, obviously apart from the language, which is obvious, are related to the use of humor, but the intercultural references, how you explain it in one language or the other, trying to adapt to your audience. In this case, the lecturer and students' perceptions do not really coincide with my analysis, but of course, because I'm using a language, it's an annotated tool, and there you see everything. But the overall, the echo that the students get is a little bit different from the reality. But what it is true, because this was a highly praised lecture, and when I checked the final evaluation, the outcome of both classes in English and in Spanish, really good marks, a lot of passes with good marks and good results, is that effective presenters using a high orchestration of modes use facial gestures, hand movements, body posture, and spatial movements. They break this wall, and they also use a wide use of images, some of them with humorous intentions. So that's what I've said. And obviously, to me, non-verbal materials, not only the verbal or the humor, non-verbal, like body language expressions, also connect and engage a lot with the audience. And the students praise that, because sometimes they complain that sometimes they have lectures that stay there or sit down or do not interact, do not look at the eyes, etc. So this is highly praised. And of course, in this case, as I was asking the lecturers to reflect about their own teaching, and I was trying to compare with the results and the recordings, I think that reflection, awareness, and this practice enables speakers to become better communicators, and finally, which is what we all want as teachers, to connect better with our students. And of course, humor can be used throughout the verbal and the non-verbal materials, both in the EMI, even though we are sometimes aware of teaching with a language which is not ours, or in a native language. And to finish with a quote that I really like, it says, "Just as great actors and dancers can make their performance look spontaneous and easy, great teachers who can create a positive classroom atmosphere can transmit insights in language and culture in such a way that learners will perceive it as less as a transfer of knowledge and more as a self-discovery of knowledge, as if they only needed their teacher to help them bring to life what had been conceived." So there we are.
Tenemos unos minutos para preguntas. ¿Alguien tiene alguna cuestión que formular? Any question? Here we have a question.
I do need it because I have a cold. And my question is, sometimes I feel it's very difficult for me or for other Chinese people, I don't know, because it's difficult to learn Spanish and English at the same time. For example, I don't know what advice would you give me when I learn, for example, when I learn a new word in English. I would put the translation in Spanish, but I don't know if it's much better learn it independently or together for us Chinese speakers.
Yes. You mean how would I do it? Well, that really depends because, for example, me as a learner of other languages, some people, we have different learning strategies some ways. So, for example, in my case, I apply a lot of mnemotechnic rules, and I think what this professor was doing, for example, when he was trying to explain something, he was using an image so that the students would remember a concept. It's what Professor González, Cristina was saying with humor, for example. She's trying to explain a concept by using an image, a joke, is easier. So I don't know how does it work for you. Do you prefer to learn the English word and then the translation in Spanish and then try to remember what is the translation in your own native language, or do you prefer to associate it with an image?
I don't know. There is much better learn it just, when I learn English, I just learn English totally without any translation and
yes, that is the best way because actually you are focusing on the language you're learning. And that's why in fact here, and this is interesting because I didn't mention it in this research I was doing, especially with this particular teacher, the curious thing is that you saw that he had 32 students taking his classes in English and 20 in Spanish. The funny thing here is that the 30 out of 32 taking the class in English were Spanish. Because normally EMI is for a bigger, I've recorded people from the faculties of law, economics. In that case, yes, you have, but here, there was, however, the teacher was not using Spanish when he was teaching in English. Yes? So that you are immersed in that language. But of course, if you get stuck, perhaps you can say one word or you can translate. But in the case of three languages, I think it's better that you try to put them in different boxes. Otherwise, you end up, and also because words can have different meanings depending on the context. So you can end up actually muddling up a little bit the situation.
Is that when I speak English, always the Spanish words will go out from the mind,
Yes,
and
yes.
it's too difficult to change sometimes because at the beginning my English level is there and my Spanish is low, and
it does happen. It does happen, especially when the two other languages you are learning, they are at different levels. Absolutely, that is totally normal. Thank you.
Is there any? Okay.
When you know the content that you're teaching. So in this case, EMI versus teaching in your own native language. In this case, it was EMI and Spanish. But in this university, you can have English and Valencian or Valencian and Spanish. So step number one, my advice, to master your subject, to know what you're talking about and what you're teaching. Number two, very important, to have a very, very good command. Obviously, of your native language you do, because it's your native language, but of the other language, and that's what we are doing these teaching training courses. Now the university requests their lecturers to teach in EMI to have a C1 level of the language. But even so, I still ask people, is C1 level enough? Sometimes we have a C1 in reading and understanding, but not so much in communicating. In this case, the professor had everything. Fantastic English and fantastic mastery of the subject. But then, as Cristina said, and Carmen agrees, perdón, Isabel, I don't know why I have to be baptized. The willingness to teach, the willingness to want that your students want to learn. And you are there, as Professor De Guayale said, you are a mediator of language. I'm not here because I possess the truth. I'm here to facilitate your learning. And I want to motivate you and engage you. And that's why it takes a lot of time to look for pictures, analogies, metaphors. Everybody's a willingness away. So those are, I think, the two ingredients. Absolutely. Yeah. And students value that a lot because they know the amount of effort that is put there. They see it. They see it. And they learn. And they want to learn because it's kind of leading by example. If your teacher is there sweating the t-shirt for you, you're gonna do it as well in the time. Absolutely. Well, you see, you are up. You are up, but you know how to be in the same level in that sense. Absolutely.
Bueno, pues con esto vamos a finalizar entonces la comunicación, ¿sí? Y damos por finalizada la sesión de la mañana.